All right, well, welcome to Fantasy Words. This is our first video. My name is Manu. That's Evan in the red flannel. And then we've also got Connor here. And yes, we did think of that name 30 minutes ago. This is our podcast where we talk about fantasy football and give our horrible takes and our good ones every now and then. So, first of all, our first topic is going to be about the NFC South today. They're a very intriguing division in the NFL this year in the 2023 to 2024 season. Um, but yeah, first of all, let's start off by talking about the Atlanta Falcons and what we think their outlook's going to look like this year.
Mhm. With the Atlanta Falcons, they've got a lot of interesting offensive weapons, but it's kind of held back by some of the lesser offensive weapons they have. So they obviously just drafted Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson has been going in the top 3 or 4 running backs in mock drafts. He's been going crazy, but is he going to be limited by that quarterback play? You really don't know because Desmond Ritter last year, he wasn't like a star player or anything. But one thing that the Atlanta Falcons did do well was run the ball. They actually last year I think ran the ball more than they had more rushing yards than they had passing yards. That's obviously going to thrive with Bijan Robinson. And yeah.
Yeah, I personally think the Falcons are by far one of the best teams or are going to be the best team in this division. With guys like, Bijan Robinson, he's a number 8 pick in the NFL draft. He's an elite running back. He was elite in college at Texas. He did great things, broke out as a freshman. Like he has all the tools to become potentially the best running back in the NFL, and he has all the tools to have a Saquon Barkley type rookie season. And as well as with the passing attack, which is where the main questions are. I think that honestly, with Desmond Ritter instead of having Marcus Mariota, I think that they will be a lot better whenever it comes to passing the ball. I mean, Ritter last year was the 8th best in QB rating over his 4 starts, which, if you're going, to be better than guys like Herbert or Trevor Lawrence, it's like that means that you actually have potential to, supply fantasy weapons such as Drake London or Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, where I'm concerned with Ritter is volume, not like his statistics. Obviously, he's thrown okay. He's not been great, but he's got it done. But if Drake London's going to be seeing 5 or 6 targets a game, then it's really not worth picking him up just because he gets good targets or good passes. He'll have like a lower average of points, I think. That's just my take.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying there. The thing with that, and honestly, whenever I first started fantasy off season, it definitely looked more so like I was not going to be into Drake London. But honestly, I love Drake London looking at it again because the man was like crazy good. He had a 29.3% target share, which was like top 5, top 10 in the NFL, and like one of the best rookie seasons we've seen since 2014 with target share. And his target totals whenever Desmond Ritter was throwing him the ball were 11, 9, 8, and 8. That was not horrible. Those, if you see those targets from somebody like Chris Olave, like we are not scared of that from Chris Olave, but we are scared from that of Drake London, which kind of confuses me. Especially since, like Drake London was a better prospect than Chris Olave. He, went higher in the NFL draft. Like he has all the tools in all the statistics and, even with the passing attack, like from Desmond Ritter, he has all of that in favor with him.
Right. And I also am kind of on the same boat as you guys. I think they have a lot of the important weapons. I personally think they're going to be the second best in their division. I think New Orleans actually beats them out by a little bit, not by very much, but just I feel like their team's a bit more well-rounded, if that makes sense. Um, but I would like to bring a point on Kyle Pitts. Last year we saw a lot of people drafting Kyle Pitts, being really excited for him. I personally didn't draft him, but I thought he would do pretty good. But we've not seen enough from Kyle Pitts to say he can be that tight end that can really ground your roster down. I wanted to see what your guys' opinions were on Kyle Pitts. Personally, I wouldn't take him. I think there's so many better options out there that you can take instead of like if you want to draft high, you can take Travis Kelce. If you want to draft low, you can take a high risk, high reward tight end like Greg Dulcich or maybe someone who you'll get points from. Maybe for example, like Fryermuth could be an option too. I just want to see what you guys think about how Kyle Pitts will work with Desmond Ritter.
I'm with you on this one. I don't like Kyle Pitts at all. The past 2 years, he's been completely overdrafted, and he's ended up like lower than a lot of other tight ends that are drafted lower than him. And so I until like I see a year where he does well, I'm not going to draft him. I don't want to take the risk. I want to see him do something before I take him in a draft.
Yeah, it seems like I'm the rebel here, as I actually kind of like Kyle Pitts for the season, and it's not because I actually like I really love the profiler. It's like, oh, I can't wait for him to see like over 150 targets this next year. No, what I really like about him is the fact that the tight end's position sucks. It truly does. Like last year, it was god awful. Besides Travis Kelce, it was like if you didn't have Travis Kelce and you had a high ranking tight end, your team was probably really crappy because you drafted him too high. But this year, you see him going number 72 overall, which, it's not crazy high for a third year tight end that, was extremely good in college. And you see the guys going around him like George Kittle. I would much rather have Kyle Pitts than George Kittle. I mean, George Kittle had like a touchdown rate that was crazy. He, was only good with Brock Purdy, who we don't even know if he's going to play the season. And he was on a crowded team with Ayuk, Debo, Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell. Like, I would much rather have Kyle Pitts. And if you go beneath him and you see Dallas Goedert, it's the same sort of situation. I mean, you have a very, very crowded offense on a team that's going to run the ball with Jalen Hurts, with DeAndre Swift, with Rashad Penny, with Boston Scott. Like, you have a team that, and go to O-line. Like, I would much rather Kyle Pitts than any of those guys. So even though, it's like, oh, I'm not a big fan, it's like, I would much rather have that guy than the other people around him.
But then again, I think you were the one who mentioned that Drake London was getting what, like 20% target share? He was getting some crazy amount. Do you think that's going to impact Kyle Pitts' production at all?
I mean, here's the deal about that offense. There's a few different offenses where if you look at, for example, the Cowboys last year, their target share was very sporadic. I mean, you had like, CeeDee Lamb pulling, 30%. And then other than that, there was like 10%, 5%, 7%, crazy like that. If the Atlanta Falcons decide to actually make their target share very, very like forward, where you have a team like the Bengals where only 3 people get targets, that's it. If you have that with the Falcons, then I could definitely see Kyle Pitts getting around 25% target share, because with that in mind, that's only 55% between the two of them. And what other weapons do they have besides Bijan Robinson? Like, I don't know any other wide receivers even on their team. Like, do you guys? I mean, it's
I do
honestly
actually.
kind of crazy. Really?
So they did pick up Matt Collins from the Raiders last year. He's a pretty good
Yeah.
blocking wide receiver, I think. He had a couple of big plays during the year, but he wasn't super influential. I think a couple of games he superseded Devontae Adams in points actually. So we might see him pop off a couple of games. I don't think he's a fantasy prospect though, or
And
anything.
also,
They also got Scotty Miller from Tampa Bay, who was just solid all year. So I think he's just going to be in there catching the odd ball.
Yeah.
He's going to steal a
Yeah.
couple of targets, but he's not going to steal a ton of targets.
Yeah. With all that in mind, let's head over to the only East Coast city on this entire NFC South, which is the Carolina Panthers. What are y'all thoughts on that offense, or that team overall?
I'm really not excited about anybody on this offense. The person that I think could do something would be maybe Adam Thielen. Maybe we see him go out and like connect with Bryce Young, get a high target share or something. But I really don't see any upside to this team. What I guess.
yeah, I agree. I have them, I think, like third in my rankings. I don't think Carolina is going to be that great. They've got Bryce Young, who's shown a ton of talent in college, and like it's fair to think he's going to be really good in the NFL. But there's also some concerns. I mean, the first concern that comes to mind with Bryce Young is obviously his height, which personally I don't think is going to be that like huge of an issue as people make it out to be, especially with his talent. But I think even the bigger issue is like the main spark you saw from Carolina last year, if any, on the offensive side, was going to be DJ Moore, and they don't have him anymore. So when you're basically replacing DJ Moore, who's like we can all agree is a really good wide receiver, you're replacing him with Thielen, and to be honest, I don't think they're really on the same level. I think DJ Moore is a much better player, even though Thielen is pretty solid. Um, it's that lack of production and also that newness for Thielen and Bryce Young. I think that's going to be too much for them to overcome. So I just don't see them being very draftable in fantasy.
I see
Mm-hmm.
is Thielen actually, because he has probably the most experience in this offense. I think he's going to be kind of a mentor to Bryce Young. He's going to get him started. He's going to be a confident wide receiver that Bryce Young can trust. And so early in the season, I think Thielen could do actually pretty well. Maybe later in the season he doesn't, but maybe later in the season he continues to do that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So kind of going back to what Manu said, I would like to point out how Manu is the by far the shortest one in this podcast. So clearly
That's true. That's
he
true.
would believe
That's true.
that
That's true.
Bryce Young's height does not matter. But my boy, the short king, Bryce Young, I don't really know how I feel about Bryce Young. He's, extremely short. He is a tiny little frame. Like the man, I know he weighed in at like 205. He is not 205. He was like, shoving down water and carbs right before he did that to get the weight up. Um, so honestly, it's like, yeah, I can't really bet on a young quarterback without weapons. I mean, yeah, Adam Thielen's good, but at the same time, he's like 33 and he hasn't had a great season since like 2019, 2018, where he scored a lot of or got a lot of yards. They have Jonathan Mingo, who they drafted in the second round, who is a project. I mean, the man never really produced at Ole Miss. And then they got, I believe, DJ Chark. But it's like it's just not a phenomenal looking situation for him. And the one other guy that they have would be Miles Sanders, and I just don't see Miles Sanders producing all that much because he's being drafted right now as the RB20. But last year he was the RB21. And I know that kind of sounds weird because you were like, hey, he actually scored a lot of touchdowns. I mean, he scored 11 touchdowns. But I would like to point out how he was up from 0 touchdowns the year before. Like he went from 0 to 11 and he scored about 6 or 7 the 2 years before that. So, you're seeing an anomaly. And I think I could potentially see a regression to the mean. Especially with that going into a worse offense. I just don't see, much fantasy outlook for this offense in general with those things in mind.
No
Yeah.
offense, Miles Sanders, but he's kind of filling Christian McCaffrey's shoes, and he is definitely not a Christian McCaffrey. He's not going to be getting any passes out of the backfield at all. He's never had any passes out of the backfield in his career. And as a runner, he's solid, but Carolina's not really going to be in the red zone very often. They're not going to get down the field very often. And so he's just going to have a bunch of yards. It's probably going to be similar to how Damian Pierce was last year. He got 100-ish yards a game, which is really good, but he didn't have any touchdowns. He didn't have any receptions. It's
Mm-hmm.
just meaningless yards.
Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think Damian Pierce is actually a really good analogy there. But I think if you're drafting Bryce Young and you're drafting him that highly, like you're not doing it to be a run first team. And especially with Miles Sanders, we've never really seen him in a situation where it's been like a run first team where they're gonna thrive off of that. So I don't see a ton of production for him, to be honest. I also don't see a ton for Bryce Young, not because of him, but just because the offense doesn't seem like it's going to thrive around him, if we're being honest here.
Mm-hmm.
I think he
Yeah.
could be like a decent pick, maybe if you're trying to get all of your firepower at the beginning outside of the quarterback position and maybe pick a quarterback that you want to be a little bit riskier with. But I wouldn't really strategize that way if I were wanting to like win the league. Maybe if you want to do the fantasy punishment for fun, that could be the route, but I just don't see it working out.
That's always an
Yeah.
option.
Yeah. I don't really ever see a really pathway for me to personally want to do any type of fantasy punishment, as that sounds absolutely awful.
Uh-uh.
But I would like to add
I
on to
know
that
many
as
you have an
I've been
experience with that.
Of
guilty.
course, of course.
Yeah. Being drafted QB 24. So you're not really even thinking about drafting him unless you're in superflex formats. And even at that price point, it's like, like just kind of shoot for the stars. I mean, you guys being drafted around him are like CJ Stroud, Brock Purdy, Sam Howell. Like you're really just shooting for the stars to be drafting Bryce Young. And so the only real fantasy, producers potentially here are Adam Thielen and Miles Sanders. And as we all agree, they are all, not that great. But with all that
An
in mind,
inexperienced
let's
fantasy goer myself, a couple of years ago, I mistakenly drafted Justin Fields in his rookie year,
mhm.
which did not go
Yeah.
well. He got maybe 5 points a game.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like
You really
the
can't
Anthony
trust
Richardson of
those
this year, but
those quarterbacks on bad teams.
yeah, exactly. Anyways, let's go over to the decrepit city of Tampa Bay with no Tom Brady.
Let's
How
do
we
it.
all feel about that offense?
I mean, Tom Brady was kind of the life of that offense. He gave everybody passes. He gave a lot of checkdowns. There were just a ton of plays in that. In fact, Tom Brady had the most attempts last year thrown. That is why Evans and Godwin strived. Godwin strived as a PPR receiver. Edwin strived more as a yards after catch receiver, but it was still all because of Tom Brady. He gave them those opportunities. Also, Rashad White. Rashad White really thrived with Tom Brady because Tom Brady in history has been one of the best, if not the best, running back quarterbacks, if you know what I'm saying. Like passing to running backs, not actually on his feet. He's clearly not very athletic in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that kind of scares me about this is we all have Carolina and Tampa Bay finishing last in this division, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that price point, it's like the Carolina Panthers have one guy going in the top 100, while the Buccaneers have three, which doesn't make much sense to me because they're going to be about the same good as an offense. So where is all the, touchdowns coming from? Nobody really knows, which is why I have a big problem with every single one of these players being drafted, meaning Mike Evans, Godwin, and Rashad White, because it's like they're not going to get touchdowns. Like, Mike Evans has been really, really good at getting 11, 12, 13 touchdowns per game. He's probably only getting like
Per
six
game.
this year. Yeah. Or sorry, my bad, per season. But
I was gonna
like,
say.
it's like you get 13, now you're down to six. It's like Godwin, he didn't have many last year, but we could just see that same performance again. Rashad White, he's a passing down running back, but he kind of sucked last year in most metrics that are rushing. He was good as a pass catcher, but it's at the same time, it's like he's a running back and they have other target competition. And with no touchdowns, where is the upside?
Yeah, and let's talk about the switch from Tom Brady to almost a quarterback that's as good as him, Baker Mayfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Baker
Yeah.
Mayfield last year was actually the highest. He had the highest checkdown rate out of any quarterback at 11%, which was similar to quarterbacks such as Derek Carr. The difference between them is that he had, I think, an 11% sack rate as well, whereas Derek Carr
Mm-hmm.
had a 5% sack rate. So obviously, Baker Mayfield's checkdowns are going to be more scattered and not as clean as Derek Carr's. So he's not going to complete them as much. But I do like what I'm seeing with the number of checkdowns he has. And that's really going to be good for Rashad White. But the problem is that Rashad White might not catch them all because it's Baker Mayfield.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then I mean, if we just look at their situation, they went from the greatest quarterback of all time to arguably the second greatest quarterback of all time. But
Honestly,
I don't think Baker Mayfield's going to really get it done there. Like, if you kind of look at his recent history, there's a reason he's been on like 4 different teams in the past like 1 or 2 years, in the past like 2 years. So, and when you look at their talent, they've got an aging Chris Godwin. I think a lot of teams kind of like figured out how that's going to go, especially from last year. Lenny Fournette, I think also a lot of teams figured out how that's going to go. I think Connor, you had Lenny for a bit, right?
thank God. But Lenny is not
Yeah.
on Tampa Bay this year.
Yeah. Oh, so we're chilling then. They got rid of him.
Yeah,
That's
that
even
is a
worse
good
for their
thing for
team, I'd
Rashad
say.
White.
Wait, what'd you say?
That is a good thing for Rashad White. No Lenny.
That's a good thing for Rashad White, but then again, I
But
don't think any of us see
Krishawn
Rashad White.
Vaughn might always steal those.
I don't think
Mm-hmm.
many of us see like Rashad White doing that great though. Especially, I mean, they could try to focus the offense around him considering their quarterback is Baker Mayfield, so he could be one to watch out for. But again, like his efficiency when running, as we saw from last year, wasn't kind of on par with what you want to get into a running back. I could see him maybe being like, if you're kind of in a desperate situation, you put him in as flex, but I wouldn't draft him very highly. I just don't think this team's going to be good, if I'm being 100% honest. Like, I
Yeah, right
honestly
now,
they'll be the worst team.
Rashad White is being drafted as the running back or the 46th pick overall. That's very high.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't see the upside in him. He's
Yeah.
going to be overshadowed by Godwin and Evans in the passing game. And I don't see Tampa Bay having that much downs in their games, and running backs thrive on downs, especially when they have high efficiency metrics, but Rashad White doesn't. He can't cover
Yeah.
up the amount of downs he has by getting 10 plus yards per play like Christian McCaffrey. He's gonna get 4 or 5 yards per play.
Yeah,
And when
and
he's
I
only
think
getting if he's only getting, I don't know, 12 to 15 touches per game, it's not going to turn into fantasy points.
yeah, and I think a big part of this is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You know, they have a young pass catching guy, but if in training camp they decide, well, maybe he's really not that good, maybe we don't want to run with him as the bell cow for the whole season, they could easily go out there and sign Kareem Hunt or Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott or like an old guy that's just waiting for a contract offer and be like, hey, here's $2 million, come play for us, and he could take goal line touches away. Like Rashad White's not a big guy, so they could easily see that happen. But anyways, let's go to personally my favorite team, the New Orleans Saints from New Orleans, Louisiana. Thoughts?
Okay, so I have the Saints at the top of my list, which kind of hurts because Evan's a Saints fan. But um, I think them being at the top of the list kind of says a lot about the state of this division. I think they'll be okay, if I'm being honest. I think Chris Olave we saw a ton of flashes from him last year fantasy wise. The one concern with him is he did a lot better when he was facing like the easier teams at the beginning of the year. But I think when you get a veteran like Derek Carr into that system, it could be a lot better of a situation than people might anticipate. I mean, Olave could get you maybe 12, 15 points a game when he was with like a carousel of QBs and none of them were really that good. So if you add probably what people would put as a benchmark for like a decent NFL quarterback into that system, you could start to see how that might work out. And then if you look at their roster a bit more, they recently, I think, added Jamal Williams, and he was a beast last year in terms of like touchdown efficiency. He was getting touchdown after touchdown, and I think at one point he had more than like the entire Broncos offense. We don't talk about that, but yeah, no, I think when you put him into that system, you have kind of a diverse offense there. You can have a good like um you can have a good like attack in the air with like Derek Carr and Olave. And then you also have a pretty good running attack with Jamal Williams. And if that doesn't work out, you've also got really good efficiency with Kamara. And obviously, there's a whole controversy behind him. We don't know if he's going to be playing, but I think the running attack could be a decent one and could be one that you could see a good outlook on. And then I think Derek Carr might just do about the same as last year. I don't see him doing like as well. Like he won't do better, I don't think, because when you go from Devontae Adams to Chris Olave, obviously Chris Olave is still a great receiver, but that's a huge setback. And also, the Raiders had a very talented offense last year. Let's not forget about that. So while I still do think it'll be good for him to have a little bit of newness, it's also that newness that I feel like could also strike him down a little bit and a bit less talent than what he had on the Raiders. Hopefully that defense can keep him more in games than what the Raiders did, though. So I think they'll still be good, but there's some pros and cons to them.
Let's talk about a very controversial player, Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara, I think if he plays this year, he might not. I think if he plays this year, it's going to be very good for him because Derek Carr was actually one of the highest quarterbacks that had a check down rate. I talked about that a little bit earlier, but with Jacobs had a lot of targets per game. And Kamara is a passing down back. So, when you mix the two, you get a lot of points. We've seen that with Kamara in the past. He's obviously been that elite level catching down back. Maybe not last year, but the years before, he was amazing. When he got 10 catches a game, he was scoring 40 plus points a game in fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And if we see that at all this year, I think that's worth a relatively high draft pick. But the problem, obviously, is with that controversy. Maybe he didn't make the best choices.
If you decide, hey, I'm in Vegas for the Pro Bowl, I think I might assault somebody in an elevator. It's always a little bit of a tough scene after that. Yeah, I really like this team too. Obviously, because I'm a fan of them, I really want them to go 17-0. But I digress. what I do really like though is Olave. I think Olave is like I have, Olave as like a wide receiver, like my wide receiver 10 overall. Like I'm drafting that man above practically all the other people in his range just because I, love the team, love the player. He was phenomenal. He had what I don't think people understand is that guys like Devontae Adams and guys like um let's see, Cooper Cup, Justin Jefferson, they play like 96% of snaps. Olave only played like 77% of snaps. Like he had the, what was it, 55th best snap share out of every single wide receiver in the NFL. That is like, he was not even the best, you know, he was like the best on his team besides, Michael Thomas, which Michael Thomas is a whole nother thing. But, he was not even the best. Like if you take 32 teams, there were people playing like wide receiver twos playing more than him on other teams. So if you add that he's playing 96% of snaps, that man's stats go like bonkers crazy. Like he, last year would have been instead of wide receiver 25, he would have been like wide receiver 14, wide receiver blah blah. Like it gets that good, and now he's going second year in a system. He's getting a better quarterback. He's getting like all the things that you need in order to succeed. So I really, really like Olave.
And we know second year wide receivers pop off in their second year.
Exactly.
I've seen in the past a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, I think that takes us to an end of this segment. This next section is about stacking. Stacking is the formation where you decide, hey, I really, really like this offense. I think I might decide to draft 2 players from it. So I'm only betting on one offense instead of betting on 2 separate offenses. For example, drafting Kelsey and Patrick Mahomes, you're only betting on one offense and you're betting on probably the best duo in the NFL instead of drafting, for example, Josh Allen and Travis Kelsey, in which you got to hope both offenses do great instead of one. So what are y'all?
And I know a professional stacker in Sam Dancy.
Whoa. For Sam Dancy, that you guys might see him pretty soon. That man, he's got next year, he's going Kelsey 101.
Oh, yeah, we got to have him on here.
Patrick up on the other. We're going to have him on here soon. He's probably just going to talk about the Chiefs the entire time.
It's all good.
Let's
talk about the Chiefs.
Let's talk about the Chiefs. Let's talk about stacking in general. So
let's talk about the Denver Broncos. I'm kidding.
Let's not.
Let's not talk about the Denver Broncos.
That's another day.
That's another day. 2-15. But anyways, what kind of stacks are y'all targeting? What are y'all thoughts on stacking in general?
Personally, I don't like stacking. I think it's a lot of risk. You're gonna require an entire offense to do well as opposed to individual players. Say you draft, I don't know, Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown. If the Eagles have an off game where they only scored 10 points and Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown combined for like 20 fantasy points, that's not well. But if you have Jalen Hurts and say, I don't know, CD Lamb could pop off. So you don't have to rely on an entire offense doing well. And where that really comes into play is the positioning of our league. So obviously it's going to be wins that gets you in the playoffs. It's not points. Scoring high points, you're going to see that a lot more when you stack because you have the potential for huge games, but it's a wins that you really want. It's that high average. And so if you're leapfrogging from 100 points a game, 160 points a game, 105 points a game, going back and forth, you're going to end up about the 500 mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you're averaging higher, you're going to get a higher chance, a higher win rate. That's what it is. Yeah,
exactly. What I really like about stacking, and like obviously I'm not a big stacker myself. I'm not, the type of guy to go out of my way and say like, oh, I got Jamar Chase. I got to draft Joe Burrow in the second round. Like that's not me. What I like about it is if you are in your fantasy championship and you have, for example, Kelsey and Mahomes, and Kelsey gets 3 touchdowns and 100 yards, and Mahomes throws for three touchdowns and 400 yards, like you are winning that week, and that means you are winning the fantasy championship. And so it's one of those things where if you're betting on one offense, it's also season long. Like for example, last year if you were to pick up Tua, Waddle, and Hill, which was very easy last year, you could have easily done that. You would have probably won your fantasy football league because Waddle, Hill, and Tua all outperformed their ADP. Well, Tua with his concussions did not, but you get my point. If Tua played the whole season, if Tua decided to maybe not be a little bit of an idiot on the field, it would have all worked out.
The
And so
problem
you know
is
if
on
you were to
those
do that
down
this year,
weeks, if you get a down week, it's like a
hey,
guaranteed loss, right?
don't be
And you don't
don't be
want
knocking
losses.
off my boy Tua. Don't be
You,
knocking
you
off me.
don't
That's
want
my
those
boy right
losses.
there.
That's what it
Bro,
comes
the
down to.
ground
You want to
knocked on
win.
my boy
You want to win every
too.
week.
That's my boy Tua. All right, don't be knocking on my boy.
You know, when the Dolphins go up against the Chiefs and get smacked, scored 0 points, it's not going to
Hey,
go well.
hey, the
It's not going to
Chiefs
go well in
defense is
fantasy.
not all that great. All right, Mr. Felix, whatever,
Chiefs are
Mr. George.
trash.
No,
Don't
they're not
cap.
getting.
They're trash.
I don't know, man.
No, Chiefs are not crap, but they are not going to like the Dolphins. They got a little
Hey,
they got a little
don't
bit of a sweet
disrespect
core
my
going on.
dog. My dogs.
You would be disrespected Tua. Tua's my dog. Tua, he's Hawaiian. He's probably got the like Honolulu moves
It's
going
true.
on. Don't be
Call him
disrespecting that.
Bro,
Single
Tua's
trick.
like borderline dead, bro.
Dude, Tua is
That's what I'm saying.
fine, all right? Tua can play off some concussions. He'll be
All right, let's
fine.
continue talking about
Tua's just got
stacking.
to chuck the ball. You get my
Anyways,
point.
Manu, what do you think?
So,
Manu, what do you think?
okay. I have very mixed feelings on stacking. I'm gonna be real. I don't do stacking like ever, but I can see the merit behind it if you do it in like very specific situations. I think you only do it for if you've got a very good QB and a very good like wide receiver one or tight end. Like you only ever do it for that, and you only ever do it if it's in a great draft position to do so. Like, um, I don't think you do it for like teams where maybe the quarterback's a little bit questionable, and then the wide receiver is like pretty good, but I think they both have to be really good, and they both have to be really consistent, kind of like Travis Kelsey and Patrick Mahomes. Like that's the best example, I think. I
mhm.
think like what Evan said, if it's in like a fantasy championship, that could be really, really good. And odds are, if you've got a team like the Chiefs, then you're probably going to win that week. So if it's a team where it's very offense heavy and it's like a really good team that wins a ton of games, I think it makes sense. Where it doesn't really make sense is if you have to go out of your way in the draft to try to like pick them higher than you would want to. That's when you might as well just like go for some better value than just doing it just because they're on the same team. Because like if they're on the same roster, you can have very volatile weeks unless you have it like planned out perfectly. I think even if you go to like Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, like we know Jalen Hurts is an absolute monster. We know AJ Brown's an absolute monster, but they didn't do as well as you would hope to like as well as you'd hope if you stacked them last year. And I think it has to also be with like a duo that's already like very established. If you do it with a new duo, it's just way too much risk, especially on top of the risk if they lose that week, you're losing that week. So, um, if it makes more sense to go out and get like a different wide receiver and a different quarterback, I think that's probably your ultimate option if they're both really consistent. But oftentimes you can't get the best quarterback and the best wide receiver unless you're an absolute demon at like drafting or trading or you scam everyone. Then
Mhm.
stacking could make sense there, but it really just depends on the situation.
Yeah, I would like to first start with saying that me and Connor are indeed demons and scammers, so we might end up winning whenever it comes to stacking.
You got to do what
But
you got to do.
exactly, exactly. With that in mind, I looked at some RotoViz underdog stuff from last year because that is what they have available, and there were 55,000 teams that decided to stack some sort of way, and the worst possible way to stack was QB1, wide receiver one. That was the worst possible way according to win rate. The best possible way was actually QB1, wide receiver two, which is a little bit wild. And it kind of makes you think like, hey, maybe taking Hurts, Brown is not really the best way, or maybe taking Mahomes, Kelsey, because Kelsey is a tight end one, but at the same time, it's kind of a wide receiver. He plays on the outside. But with all that in mind, I actually personally like the stack of Tua Waddle, Cousins, Addison. Teams like that where I am targeting a QB1 tight wide receiver two because then I don't have to go out of my way and say, hey, I can't wait to spend my first round draft pick and then my third round draft pick on two specific players and reach on them a little bit. But instead, I can say, well, Addison's in the eighth round. I like him anyways. I think I might just go ahead and take him.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's also a really interesting statistic. But where I slightly disagree is like, I think if they're at the right position where you can get that wide receiver one, you also obviously also have to think about your draft capital too. If you've got that those two and you know they're like a duo that's gonna do really well, like you've seen it in the past, then it can make sense because you can get a lot of points. And if it doesn't work out, just trade away one of the players that you know is really good, maybe your wide receiver, or trade away your quarterback for a quarterback slightly worse or maybe on a different team, and then for extra like capital. And it could really make sense from like a trading perspective. You've always got to go into the draft thinking like not just this is going to be my final team, because like 90% of the time your first team looks completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I know my team last year was like I might have had 2 players that I drafted still on my team.
Yeah, same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know personally for me last year, yeah, my team was wildly different. I mean, if I go back to week 1 and then I go to week 17, I'm pretty sure I had about 2 players were the same, and one of them was a man by the name of Justin Jefferson. So, it makes sense that obviously I'm going out and I'm trying to scam other people in our league, like Jack
Right.
Butler. So,
Yeah, and let me tell you, Evan and I won. He was the runner up. I don't think either of us stacked players, and we got
no.
first and second place. So there you
Yeah.
go.
I
That's
would like
just
to point
proof.
out how the year before that, I also got second place, whereas Connor got second to last.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I'm just a second place demon, and Connor apparently likes to go on the polar extreme. So,
Hey,
I
you
would
know,
also like
maybe
to point
last year
out
was my year. This year is also my year.
I would also like to point out that
what
Connor
about that?
screwed me over about 4 times last year, and that Cooper Cup
Connor,
absolutely killed me. Thank you.
I'm sorry,
yeah,
man.
Connor likes to screw over many people. I think it's a hobby of his.
All right, let's move on from that, and that actually kind of wraps up the podcast. You guys make sure to tune in next week, and see you later, or don't see you later. I don't really care.
Mhm.
Yeah.